We'll now turn to domestic politics in Saudi Arabia, and we're joined by Ali Al Ahmed. He's the director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs in Washington. He's a journalist, and he's a Saudi dissident. Ali, welcome to CN Live.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Ali, I'll start you off with a very easy question. How did you react to the 60 Minutes interview with Mohammed bin Salman?
The 60-minute interview with Mohammed bin Salman was a setup, a PR attempt to undercut the PBS documentary that was coming 2 days afterwards. So PBS came on Sunday ahead of Jamal Khashoggi's first anniversary, of his murder's anniversary. And we know the fact that this was done very quickly. Corvus arranged for it. This is the second part. This is the second interview with this soft interview with Mohammed bin Salman, with Nora O'Donnell. And it was very clear this was rehearsed and used as a PR campaign to improve the image of Mohammed bin Salman in the United States specifically. And you can see that they have used what we call a window of credibility, him taking responsibility for the murder, but not personally ordering it. It was designed to give Mohammed bin Salman some credibility that he cares about it. So I can tell you from my experience, this was rehearsed, this was made up. It was not an interview. It was mostly like a well-prepared charade to give the Saudis using one of the most credible TV magazines, 60 Minutes, which is over 50 years old, status. And the Saudis give them credit. They have been able to use American journalists and outlets even to their advantage by spreading fake information. And what happened with 60 Minutes is disgrace, the disgrace for journalism.
So what you're saying is it was to preempt the PBS documentary. They knew what happened with the PBS documentary. They were uncomfortable with it. They were worried. So they reached out to CBS to get an interview to air just before it. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I hope that CBS leadership will look into how Nora O'Donnell went to Riyadh, how quickly this was organized. And we know that Nora O'Donnell has friendly relationship with the UAE ambassador. They are friends. The UAE ambassador to Washington, they are friends, and they visit each other, they're family friends. So that has to do a lot with how 60 Minutes did these interviews with MPS. This was really, again, this was a betrayal of journalism. The questions were set up, the answers were prepared ahead of a time, so they just had to kind of go through it and do the takes necessary to get the right answer. It was not, these questions and answers took some rehearsal and several takes, and I hope the CBS management will investigate this entire.
How do you know that they took several takes?
I was a consultant for 60 Minutes in the past, and I worked as a CBS consultant for 6 years, so I know the environment.
So basically, CBS allowed themselves to be used just so they can get a scoop to get out ahead of PBS.
And that is, I think, one of the faults of modern day journalism. You know, access journalism is given us sometimes fake news.
And Mohammed bin Salman was able to make them wait till 3 a.m., but he also seemed to be quite well trained how to answer and make his eyes look like he's not lying.
Absolutely. I think, like I said, I can tell you from my experience as a person who studied media, understand these nuances, that this was prepared. He was not under stress, and his facial responses, he was comfortable, and these answers, I believe, were prepared by Corvus, Mike Pizzarello, and Adel Jubair. So their questions and answers were all written down, and he just had to rehearse those things.
Oh, that's quite interesting. So they knew how to respond, and they set this up. Did he help his cause with this CBS interview, you think?
I think the interview, because it is in a respectable, supposedly credible TV magazine, it's the oldest TV magazine running on American television. So yeah, I think he helped himself somewhat. I don't think it completely taken or improved his image, but this is a good try and a successful attempt well done, I would say, on their behalf. Of course, because I am an expert. I'm from within the sort of the business, media business, so I can see through it. But most people who have seen it, the public, probably most of them did not see through it.
So a year ago, when the murder took place, there was all this talk. Some people were saying, "This is it. The House of Saud is going to fall." And of course, we've been hearing that since the 1990s. A very good book by Abarish, the Saudi journalist, the
Palestinian.
Palestinian journalist, rather, about Saudi Arabia is what I meant. And that hasn't happened. So there was, however, at the time, when the CIA came out and said that he'd done it, he was behind the murder. It appeared that the CIA did not want, of course, the royal family to fall, but to just get rid of him and probably replace him back with bin Nayef. What has happened in that year that has allowed bin Salman to survive?
Bin Salman has the support of President Trump and the support of the UAE ruler MBZ. Uh, the CIA does not have the force on the ground to undo MBS. MBS controls everything. He is the strongest Saudi leader ever in terms of him controlling security and military. They report to him directly, and in terms of controlling the economy and also controlling the council of ministers. So he controls basically all facets of power in the country, and he has eliminated any competition. The only competition that the CIA had, it was their favorite son, favorite agent, in fact, MBN, Mohammed bin Naif. But the guy also has, he was a cocaine addict. And he was CIA proxy. One of the reasons that the CIA was angry with MBS and released and leaked this information because he is not their guy. Their guy was MBN, and when MBS basically managed to overthrow MBN and put him in a box, they were upset. I don't think the CIA has too much right now in terms of ability to unseat him. MBS has no competition within the ruling family, and even if everyone in the ruling family try to conspire against him, they will not be able because they have no real power. They don't have. None of them have military type group, or they don't have any influence in the army or in security forces. And because of that, it's done. You can say this is a decisive win for MBS, and his personality as a person who takes risks and do crazy things, I think helped him to achieve that. So the only way I think the Saudi royal family, you're talking about the end, I mean, the signs are there. The only way this monarchy would collapse if it eats itself. That's one scenario, and I don't see it. Of course, they are not happy, most of the family, because one guy, MBS, is taken over. But what you have, I think, the easiest way or the most plausible way I see it is some military officers would turn against the ruling family or against MBS in particular and take him out. The murder, I'm working on this report, the murder of the Saudi king's chief bodyguard was part of that palace infighting and competition. And he was murdered because he was working with another part of the ruling family. And you would see in the next few weeks, you would see some repercussion of that because they have killed the sort of the messenger between the king and these some princes. When you see some princes being off or suddenly dead, and that would show you that this was the reason that Mr. Al-Fahm, the chief bodyguard, was killed as well. So in terms of having sort of a popular revolution to overthrow the monarchy, I don't see it. I mean, that would be ideal, but we don't see it because the country is big and and it's not united. You have different regions, But it doesn't mean that there will not be revolts or popular uprising. There will be a popular uprising, especially in the eastern part. And this will, I think, will come to fruition when things start to go south in terms of stability of the Saudi government. And it is very fragile. I think sometimes fragile things stay stable for a long time, but then when they fall, everything falls very quickly.
All
So
right.
I don't think that they will survive. You know why? Because this model of government is not sustainable at this time and age. We are beyond an absolute monarchy that decides everything for you. People, what you eat, what you read, what time to go to bed, and how do you worship, and which TV you watch, or which website you access. That is not sustainable at this time and age.
It's still going on, and with American help, which is
As
quite
it's
interesting.
propped without being propped by Western powers, this monarchy would have gone 50 years ago.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. I want to just ask you about the bodyguard. When was he murdered, and how close was he to the king? Did they have a good personal relationship? It was many years that he was together with.
Abdulaziz al-Fagham was the closest person to King Salman, and
Yeah.
he was also the chief bodyguard of King Abdullah for a long time. So since 2002, he has been close to King Abdullah, then became his chief bodyguard. Then he moved after King Abdullah died, and he was a loyal, very strong, loyal. He came from the National Guard, which basically is a cult for King Abdullah. So they have a lot of admiration and respect for him. And when King Abdullah died, King Salman took him as his chief bodyguard as well. So that was unusual, but because Al-Fagham came from the National Guard to the Royal Guard, and that has because King Abdullah did not trust the Royal Guard that was developed by his brothers, half brothers, the Sudaris. So he needed to bring his own people, and Fagham was one of them. But King Salman carried on that role, got Al Fagham, who became popular in some Saudis as strong and tall and protector of the king. Uh, so in our information indicates that he was a conduit that was used by some members of the royal family. He was, remember, he was loyal to parts of the old Saudi regime, like King Abdullah, his children, and some other wings in the ruling family. And he was transmitting messages from and to King Salman to these people. Because King Salman, I'll give you something no one heard about before, but we have confirmed it. King Salman, last year when Khashoggi was murdered, when the information about his murder came out around mid October, it took King Salman 11 days to be told that Jamal Khashoggi, King Salman knows who he is very well, was killed at the consulate. So 11 days it took. So because King is isolated, he's not, he doesn't have his full capacity. You can tell when he starts talking, for example, you cannot make sense of anything he says. And his age, obviously, and his dementia is setting in. So he was not told. He doesn't have that stability to give orders or to control his son. His son is the decider. But they were hoping that the king would do something, and MBS knew of this, found out of this, and that was the reason that he took the decision. Our information, I'm hoping to finish the report today, but he was not killed on the day that they said he was killed. And we will show that in the report. To us, it's very clear that he was murdered by MBS, and he is in a way similar to Khashoggi, meaning that the reason Khashoggi was murdered, not because, like, some people say he called for freedom of expression, all that, because he was working on behalf of one side of the monarchy against MBS. And he was defending one side of the monarchy against MBS. And that's why it is almost like you call it a palace feud. and Khashoggi was caught in the middle, being working for one side, and he was killed. Al-Fagham here also, I think he was murdered for the same reason, according to the sources we have.
Well, Ali, that's quite interesting. So, are there only two factions? And was the bodyguard on the same faction with the princes who were put in the Ritz-Carlton? Which, of course, Khashoggi was part of that. One of his princes sponsoring him had been imprisoned, correct, in the hotel. So, are there only two factions? There's only one going against MBS, and he felt he had to kill this bodyguard. I mean, that's a bit extreme, isn't it?
The Saudi ruling family is so huge. There's not only two factions. You
Right.
have the children of Abdullah, and they have the children of King Faisal, Khalid al-Faisal, who is close to King Salman, and he may be the person to that was using Al-Fagham as a conduit. You have also MBN, who has been, and it showed that he is close to Al-Fagham family. He in fact went to the family to give condolences, and he requested permission to be allowed to leave his house arrest, and because he's under house arrest. This is the former Saudi crown prince that was toppled. And so he went to the house to give condolences, and he has connections to, or Al-Fagham has connections to him. So you're talking either MBN or Khalid al-Faisal, who are the people who are trying to get MBS dislodged, and that effort accelerated after the attacks on Abqaiq, because the Abqaiq facility is the crown jewel of Saudi Arabia's oil industry. So when this happened, it drove many members of the ruling family to worry that MBS is bringing them down, and they accelerated their attempt to take action. And Al-Fagham, who tried, I think, his loyalties are not with MBS. He's loyal to the king and to other members of the ruling family.
So, on the one hand, it looks like he's pretty, given what's happened a year ago, he's pretty solidly and still in control. That's on one hand. On the other hand, he's murdering people everywhere in order to stay in power. So that shows a sign of weakness as well. If you have to continuously murder people in order to stay in power, that's not a very solid foundation, is it?
MBS, he is in power. He is firmly in control, but at the same time, he is terrified, and he doesn't trust people around him. And he has a personality since he was a child, in fact, that it's more violent. And I spoke to a palace insider who actually saw MBS when he was 5 years old, and saw how he was like a violent child as a child. It didn't make any sense. At 5 years of age, he was basically coming and destroying everything in the room, like he said, without reason. So he was not a well-behaved child, and I think because he was the first child of a favorite wife of King Salman, he had this problem. His own mother, years ago, she told King Salman, her husband, that your son is crazy. He has a mental problem, and that drove MBS to put his own mother under house arrest as well. So he has that type of personality that becomes angry. He has himself beaten people with his own hands, including his wife. But I'm talking about people who were during King Abdullah's time. He slapped the secretary of King Abdullah. He threatened the judge to shoot a judge, a chief judge in Saudi Arabia. So you are looking at a person who does not like people opposing him, or or speaking against him, and that explains his behavior. He didn't like what happened in Yemen, so he waged a war, and he puts everybody in jail. Takes very swift action, and that, I think, is reflected by his own upbringing. Sometimes his size gives him that assurance that he can do these things, and there is not hasn't been any reaction from the United States for his war on Yemen or his kidnapping of Lebanese prime minister. I think the only time he basically was shown that you're not that tough guy when the Abqaiq attacks happened. Either Iran was behind it directly or the Yemeni forces did it. That was, I think, a wake-up call for him. He may change his ways. I have no idea, but he is not on the verge of collapse. He is unstable, yes, but I don't think it's going to be months. Even it's not that close for him.
I want to get to the attacks on the oil installations, but can you think of any figure in Saudi history, as short as it is, that who was like Mohammed bin Salman?
No. And none of this. See, Saudi Arabia was established, by King Abdulaziz, and King Abdulaziz was a violent guy. But he was also very shrewd and very. He's not it's not the type of a person who's angry. MBS is probably the first, you can call him, ruler who has the traits of he was this young. This is the youngest ruler. Beside King Abdulaziz, this is the youngest ruler, and has more wealth, and he controls more power than even his grandfather, founder of Saudi Arabia, ever had. So this youth, this power and support from the United States and the UK is very important. I think all pushed him into becoming this violent, careless leader that sometimes is working against his own interest. And I predict that he will continue to do that because there hasn't been much repercussion for his actions or his way of acting. You may see some things that happening from Yemen or through Iran that will calm him down or restrain him, but I don't see it coming in the next few weeks, for example.
I saw that attack on the oil installations, a major attack that shut down half their production, as a big punch in the nose to a bully. The Iranian and the Houthis calculated, I think, that there would not be a response from Saudi Arabia or the United States militarily, because the U.S. knows what a catastrophe a war against Iran would be to their own interests and certainly to the people in the entire Gulf region. So they saw an opening there. And we have to see this in the context of who started the war. The Saudis started the war in Yemen, and this was part of the war. I mean, Pompeo said this was an act of war. Yes, there was a war going on, so it was an act of war. But they, of course, in the West, the American press is portraying it as some out-of-the-blue terrorist attack by a bunch of crazy Iranians, rather than as part of as a battle in a larger war begun by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. Am I right? Did they calculate that the U.S. basically and the Saudis are essentially powerless to respond to this attack?
I believe so. I did in 2008 write a 70-plus page report about the threats to Saudi oil installation, and Abqaiq was the central part. And we had, this is before drones, and one of the scenarios we ran is the fact that if there's any war or sort of a war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the first target would be Abqaiq, because this is where most of the oil is being processed, and it's in a small geographical area. It's very easy to hit, and it's not far from Iran with their ballistic missiles. They were not hit by ballistic missiles, but drones and cruise missiles. But the effect was there. The Americans cannot respond in the same way, because if there is an all-out war, the oil industry, there are other targets that we put in our report that could be hit easily and will be destroyed. and it will put Saudi Arabia in complete meltdown. For example, and this is my area, this is where I grew up, so I know it so well. We have my hometown is surrounded by all these oil installations, and we know it. I have been into many of them, and if Iran hits the Jubail area, which has the largest water desalination plant that also generates electricity, that's called Ghazlan plant. That means that Riyadh has not a drop of water to drink. And you cannot rebuild this in like in a week or two, especially if you hit it with a ballistic missile. And you have you have Jubail industrial compound or city that has about 15, 19 different chemical plants. And they could be hit in one shot, even in a barrage, and that would be destroyed. And you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of loss. Just these two targets will take Saudi Arabia off. They will not have electricity. Riyadh has electricity comes from Jubail. Riyadh's water, that 465 kilometer pipe that goes from Jubail all the way to Riyadh. You can drive a car in that pipe. It's so huge, and if that plant is hit, then Riyadh has no water. That's 5 million residents. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to get water from? So you are looking at a very devastating scenario, even if there was a limited attack, even if the Americans come with their full force, which they don't have in the Gulf. So this scenario of war is only being pushed by people who are either completely ignorant of the aftermath and the repercussions, or people who would like to see that land destroyed and the people killed, because you're talking about massive human loss if a war starts, including the entirety of my family, because this is where we grew up. This is the Ras Tanura oil terminal, the largest in the world, is in my hometown. So if they hit it, my family will be wiped out with not by bombs, but by poisonous smoke. And pipelines are everywhere. We drive over them basically every day. So you are looking at a disastrous outcome of any war. So no, I think I will give Mohammed bin Salman and Donald Trump as well credit for saying, "Oh, we should talk." It took an attack on Abgaig, but the best way for all parties here is to end these wars and talk, because there is a lot of commonality or common goals between the Saudis and the Iranians in the region, and they can do it. They can work it out. It's better for everyone, even for the Americans.
Ali, you're talking about your family, but you're living here in the Washington area. I assume you cannot go back. Can you give us a little bit of the background of your family and what happened to them when they tried to protest?
Well, I am here in forced exile. Cannot go back, and my nationality was taken away without even my knowledge. I just found out incidentally. So I'm stateless. The Americans will not give me citizenship because the Saudis talk to them about it, and they, in fact, the American system has been trying to kind of tie my hands so I don't write and I don't speak. So this is before Khashoggi, before the Saudis kept trying to bring me in many ways, including trying to get the Americans to do it. And I was lucky that these attempts were unsuccessful. There was an active attempt by the US government to kind of find something that they can sort of invalidate my asylum. They couldn't, because I don't have any record or legal activity. So there was a lot of scrutiny, a lot of preventing me from getting a work permit, travel document, which can completely in violation of U.S. laws, by the way. And this was done from the top up. I can tell you, Robert Mueller was involved in it himself. I found out through allies in the government when he was head of the FBI. And then, of course, the Saudi attempts to spy, to infiltrate, to kidnap continued until, and to hack. The hacking continued until recently. I have no idea if they will continue to try to hack me, but I have been approached by members of the royal family. I met with the Saudi king brother, who was at the time the head of the intelligence. His name is Mugren. We met here in the Ritz-Carlton in Tassin Corner. I met with him and his deputy, and their request to try to convince me to go back. They wanted me to go on the plane, but you don't see that in the media, because the American media, they don't want to talk about it. They want to talk about somebody else. So there was those attempts. There was those spying attempts, and there we have evidence to all of that. By the way. So there we have conclusive, irrefutable evidence. So these are not claims. What you can see here is they didn't like a voice that's independent, that wanted actually something modern, and the United States as a guarantor of the survivability of the Saudi monarchy joined in. And I was told that by I remember I had a talk with Philip Mudd, who was CIA and FBI, and he told me point blank, we support the Saudi royal family against anyone, domestic or foreign. I said, even human rights advocates. He said, absolutely. So it's not about so-called terrorists and so on. So that has been the case, and that's the reality. People don't want to hear it, they don't want to hear it, but that's the reality. And my family has been through a lot since decades now. My direct family, I'm not talking about my uncle who was in jail in the 60s and my other uncle who was in jail in the 90s. I'm talking about me when my entire family was arrested in the 80s. And then my younger brother spent now over 20 years in prison, my youngest brother. And my nephew now has been in jail for almost 8 years for protest and so on. And my brother will, if the Saudi regime continues to survive, will be in prison for the next 13, 14 years. He got a 17-year sentence for protesting. And he had already spent 8 years prior in prison. He was tortured, everything, the whole package. He has not been able to have a life. There's a lot of restriction in the family and harassment and so on. So all my brothers have been to prison. My own mother, my father, all political prisoners. So this is just a microcosm of what many families in my country go through. And it's because of me sometimes, it's because just the way the system is. But because of, I am in DC, I've been vocal, and I've been, I have been basically been on US mass media or mainstream media. That was very, they made the Saudis very angry, and they tried, and they continue, by the way. You can notice, for example, I was on all the American shows, all the mainstream media, but in the past few years, that was all cut off because there was an attempt, there was a campaign, secretive campaign against me with people, with the people in CNN, with all the major news network, not to get this person, me, on TV. I was the person they go to. Look at the Washington Post, for example. I am actually the only journalist. I went to journalism school. I have a journalism degree. I have worked in journalism. I have done reports, investigations, and I've written. I've been here in Washington since 2001, and I've done a lot of credible reports. But the Washington Post has not interviewed me once about, after Khashoggi was killed. You would think that would be the natural thing. I submitted an article about my experience. This is before we knew Khashoggi was actually dead. So, and I said, I feel the same because I have been through this. ABC, and here are the evidence. They refuse to publish it. They're not the only one, by the way. So that's a product of a campaign, and that's very common to silence voices. And I'm not the only one. I just happen to be here a long time. So I've known how when I had access, and now I don't have that access because somebody came and said, here is money, or gave them the wrong impression, and they, instead of coming back to me, they didn't do it. In 2014, for example, I gave the Washington Post an exclusive report that I worked on for a year, investigative report showing Saudis who were in the United States. We showed pictures, names, locations, everything. How they were here in the United States as Saudi students brought and sponsored by the Saudi government, who left the United States and joined ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. When I told the reporter in the Washington Post, I have this information, if you would like it, or I'll publish it. She said, please don't publish it. So we spent months going back and forth on it, and then they decided not to publish it. The decision was not to publish anything. This was basically us exposing the largest foreign nationality that were in the United States and joined ISIS, which is a huge story, you would think. But the Washington Post killed it because it came from us. And because I think the CIA or FBI didn't want that story to come out. And that's exactly what happened. So you see that there are limitations about independent journalism, like what we do. And then we will show in the next weeks and months other exclusive information. We'll see if the mass or mainstream media will pick it up. And it's very good stories. I hope you will cover it.
Well, we're certainly open to that. Ali, anything you want to throw our way, and it's no surprise that that's how the Washington Post reacted to that, especially if there was a U.S. complicity in this, or at least turning a blind eye to these guys.
And what we know in that report, by the way, that the U.S. government, at least because one of the things we did is we tried to test if they knew. Well, some of the people, I wouldn't say all, but some of the people who were supposed to have known about it, they did not. The State Department, for example, they did not know about this. Yeah, and that kind of showed that the Saudi government knew, and they did not share it with the Americans, or it was part of a deal. I cannot really tell you, but they were shocked when we kind of tested the water. If they had any information, and we showed it to them, they were shocked.
Well, as long as there's this very close relationship between American presidents and the foreign policy establishment here and the royal family, they'll have their back, and their rule seems secure. Of course, there's so much money being thrown the other way here, and that's the basis of it. Think tanks, companies, newspapers, you name it, who are dependent on Saudi money. That's still the corrupt relationship. But there's one other element here, and it's so hard to get our hands on a feel for what's going on here in the West anyway. And that is the thinking of the population in Saudi Arabia. There are a lot of people in your country, your former country, who are not rich, like say in Qatar, where they all are, or the other Gulf monarchies. There's a huge unhappy part of the Saudi population. How do we know how they're thinking? There are no real public opinion polls. And that has to be the greatest fear, that at some point, having seen the other rebellions in the region in the last decade or so, that this will happen in Saudi Arabia. What can you tell us about the current feeling amongst the population towards this ruling family?
The population is very clear, and that is demonstrated by a few things that, again, like the Washington Post refused to talk about. And I remember in 2015, when the last Saudi or the elections for partial elections for the Saudi municipal councils, where finally the Saudis allowed women to vote and run for office. And I remember this discussion with the Washington Post reporter who was dispatched from here to Riyadh Brian Murphy. He ended up being the chief editor for Middle East, but I think he has left since. And when he, they had a very good story, very positive story about the Saudi election, historical election, they call it. They never said these councils have no power, have zero power. They're just councils that they don't do anything. They don't have appropriations. They don't make decisions. That part of the story was not made, was not included in any story. The number two and very important indicator, only 5% of eligible voters took part in these elections. There was basically a boycott of these elections. That again did not make it to the Washington Post or other Western media. They said they told a small part of the story where women were allowed to vote and run for office. You saw there. I remember one of the women who was elected. She was elected by 2 votes, her votes and her husband's vote. That was how much people. This boycott tells you how the people in the country feel about the Saudi government. This is a great indicator of how we feel. But an indicator that we always say to pro-Saudi, either American, Saudis themselves or outsiders, they say, "Oh, the Saudi family is very popular. People want this." And I said, "Well, if that's the case, why are you not allowing the people to prove that? Why don't you let them choose who run the country? Will they pick King Salman or Ali Ahmed or somebody else?" So it is generally we can tell from experience and from contacts that the majority of the population are opposed to the ruling family. They might not have ability to voice it because of restrictions and oppression, or they think that it's too risky for them to do. But I have not seen many Saudis that we meet come to the United States or we talk to who are supportive of the monarchy. Everybody's looking beyond the monarchy. What's keeping the monarchy in power is it's that Western support and their ability to purchase supercomputers to monitor everything. And there is a video of that we just serviced recently of them bragging about that we can find out everything that you write, and we have a relationship with these social media companies that we can get information on you. And that's very, very true, because every week we see Twitter and other media or other social media companies killing accounts or tweets, and they just killed an account yesterday that's just basically talking about victims of execution and victim of arrest in the eastern province without any. I had my Arabic account, which has 35,000, and a verified account killed without reason, without explanation, and with a warning that do not try to open another account. You have that support that's keeping the family in power. Without that support, you will see how weak and how unpopular the ruling family and the monarchy in general. It's not people, what you see even now after Jamal Khashoggi was murdered, they talk about the MBS as he's the only evil in that country or in that family. It's not. It is what I like to call, and I will write an article with that title. It is the monarchy stupid. Monarchy are bad for us. Monarchy is basically a group of people, a mafia that is pillaging an entire country. Any sort of elitist type of system does that. It's just the nature of life.
I would think that Mohammed bin Salman understands the unpopularity of himself and the family, which helps inform his psychology of paranoia, of weakness, of lashing out, of having to murder and stay in power through spilling blood. It's worthy of Shakespeare. Ali, thank you so much for joining us today and having the courage to continue to speak out on this issue, knowing the dangers that are out there. And I do appreciate you came on CN Live to share this time with us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. This is CN Live.